And I would like to introduce Jenny Kimball, who is our CEO and one of our owners. I know, but and one of the most incredible people you can ever imagine working for. So, anyway.
What else is he going to say with his boss standing right here, right? Anyway, welcome. Glad to be here. Glad to see everybody here. And I wanted to introduce you to a woman I greatly admire and respect, and who's, as most other women I greatly admire and respect, has become a dear, dear friend of mine. So I'm lucky to have that. So Jann Haynes Gilmore. She's a PhD, though I've never called her doctor. I guess I should be calling you doc, huh? She's an art historian, a writer, watercolorist. She directed the museum's programs at the National Endowment for the Humanities in Washington. She's the author of several books, numerous articles, as well as an independent curator of exhibitions of forgotten American women artists. Given what's going on in the country right now, it's nice to highlight women, whether they're forgotten or not, right, Jann? So Jann is a collector of art by American women artists from 1850 to 1950. I would give my right arm to see that collection. She lives in Alexandria, Virginia, but she spends a ton of time here in Maine and in Santa Fe. And I must say, Barbara Felix and I met Jann a couple of years ago when she was doing research for her Olive Rush book, and the three of us just bonded, and we learned more about Olive Rush in that 1 hour than I could imagine. Her book is now here. It is beautiful. I haven't had a chance to read it all, but I will. But at any rate, I hope you all join me in giving a very warm welcome to LaFonda's dear friend, Jann Haynes Gilmore. Doc, come on.
I feel like giving a political talk with all this equipment, but I figure if I did, people would start leaving the room. So, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, to be in this, I almost call the LaFonda Hotel a sacred place, and additionally, it was in this very room that Olive Rush painted here in March 83 years ago. So it's a great, maybe we're feeling her spirit today. I think Jenny, I tell people all over the country, not only is she a superb businesswoman, but dear to my heart, she's saving the history of her business. And this is rare. I know that all of you in this audience know this, but just shout out, shout out, shout. Olive Rush. Well, let's talk about Olive Rush. I like to give some points before I start that are really conclusions. And I would welcome, let's be casual, and let's learn together. These are my own assessments of Olive Rush, and I feel that they truly are assessments because literally, except for one exhibition catalog and a few things here or there, Olive Rush has not been treated seriously or scholarly in the last 60 years. She died 60 years ago. She died in 1966. So what I would say about her is about 7 points. She is certainly forgotten. She's been neglected, ignored, overlooked, and all of that contributes to being forgotten. There's been some interest, but as I said, she continues to be forgotten. I was astonished yesterday. We haven't had a chance to talk about it. We were at a book dealer's, and we were talking about my book, and he said, well, you know, it's nice to have this book, but she really wasn't part of the art colony in Santa Fe, and I just didn't want to go over it with him, and I'm hoping that this book will educate people to the fact that she very much was a part of the art colony. Another thing I would like to say, and we'll show an image that makes this point, she branded herself. And that was certainly a verb that she didn't know when she moved here even in 1920. It's a verb that politicians are using today. But what happened is she allowed herself, for probably just innocent reasons, to be photographed in her maternal grandmother's Quaker clothing. And I know I've been told that you're a very educated audience and you're probably going to ask me questions, or I will learn from you. But remember, Santa Fe, when she moved here in 1920, was a dusty, desolate, not a major media outlet or prospects of photography place. And she allowed herself to be photographed in her grandmother's clothing, and she used this portrait, this official portrait, for at least 2 decades as a PR photograph. And that's not to say, and I'm going to talk about it, that Quaker, her faith, did not permeate every aspect of her life and her art, but I think that set the stage somewhat for her being ignored these many years. And I've had people this week and this month, since we've been in Santa Fe, say, well, Olive Rush's art is hard to type. And I agree. So many of the known artists here, they were either one thing or the other, but Olive Rush was an illustrator. She was an easel artist. I'm going to talk a lot today about her wall decorations, and I don't even know, maybe you can help me with this term. I mean, she was a muralist, certainly, but they sort of move over to wall decorations as well. She also, and importantly, in many of these wall decorations, painted in true fresco, which meant that some helper would come in the morning and put wet plaster on the walls that she then proceeded to decorate with the pigment. And added to all of that, she was usually on scaffolding. So it was a pretty specialized talent that she had. And also, I hope I make the point strongly in this book that she did become a modernist. So many people have portrayed her as this demure little Quaker lady who painted landscapes. Nothing that's wrong with that. I paint landscapes. But truly, through her 40 years here in Santa Fe, she became certainly a modernist in her work. Her greatest contributions have been overlooked. Incredible legacy of a Native American fine art advocacy. We'll talk about that. Her WPA murals. And as an art educator, I'll touch on that in a moment. Personally, she never married. She devoted her life to art and to her work. Quakerism, as I just said, was her faith, and it really drove her both in her personal life and in her art. She was gentle, and she had that inner spirit that Quakers have. Community, no one knows much about this. Think about 1920, 30, 40. She was a social reformer. She worked very, very keenly for war relief during World War II. She was certainly anti-war. She harbored conscientious objectors, traveling from Pasadena, California to Philadelphia, the seats of Quakerism in this country. Time and time again, in her backyard, she had a ramada, and they were welcome to stay there. And finally, she was an environmentalist. And I guess she didn't know that word back then, but she railed in the newspaper about the city cutting down trees at the corner of the Alameda at Alameda and Paseo and so on and so forth. She used to rest under the shade of those trees when she was walking to town. She advocated for parks. She fought vigorously with the city council in Santa Fe not to make Canyon Road a one-way retail road. She thought it should remain residential. And there was much talk in the media, certainly the last 2 decades of her life, of the magnificent gardens that she created behind her house on Canyon Road. And finally, she was a philanthropist herself and gave a great physical legacy to the state and to the city of Santa Fe. This is an abstract painting that is found, of olive rushes, found in the Archives of American Art in Washington, the Smithsonian. Wonderful to tell people, if they don't already know, that the Archives of American Art is a repository of approximately 20 million items of correspondence or whatever, paper, related to American artists in this country. And it's available for scholars and just remarkable families. Generations of American artists have given this wonderful resource, and it continues to grow. A woman here in Santa Fe named Sylvia Loomis, back in the early 60s, Olive was becoming ill and certainly getting dementia, gathered her papers and several other papers of artists that were still living and got those to the Smithsonian Institution. So we're grateful for that. My other body of material out of which this book came were letters written by Olive Rush to a Delaware woman artist, and they were lifelong friends. We'll talk a little bit about that in a moment, but I'm so fortunate to have those original letters dating from 1904 through 1959. That Olive Rush wrote back to Ethel Leach, really with a wonderful venue of Santa Fe. So we'll go on. So here is the photograph taken in 1918. And if you notice, Julian A. Dimmock was the photographer, and he is perhaps the only love interest that Olive Rush was ever serious about, and maybe he persuaded her to dress in her revered Quaker clothing. Dimmock was interesting in himself. He and his father became very well-known photographers at this time, and their work is collected in the Museum of Natural History in New York. But there she is, and how he got her to look that serious and thoughtful, I don't know. But there's the photograph that she used for roughly 2 decades. Olive Rush's background, a wonderful Quaker background. Her ancestors came from England. They migrated to Philadelphia, probably from New England, came down through the brace of the Appalachian Mountains and settled in North Carolina. You may hear a little southern accent with me. I'm a native North Carolinian. And the Rush family settled in south central North Carolina, where there was a huge Quaker settlement. Several of her great ancestors owned slaves, and her great-great-grandfather left North Carolina in 1829, fleeing slavery in that area, and migrated over to Ohio, first in Indiana, and then down to Fairmont, Indiana, where the Rush family settled. And Olive was born there. This is she and her brother Calvin, her youngest brother. She was one of 7 children. One died at childbirth, but she was the last girl. And she and Calvin were very, very close, as were she and her other younger brother, Charles Everett. I think that this photograph, as I've looked at it over time, may be a little bit later than 1885. But her father, Nixon Rush, was a very extraordinary Quaker man. He was a minister, and he traveled the circuit, but he was progressive. And she writes, Olive Rush writes, that in at least the household, they did not refer to the typical thee and thou that we know from that movie, Friendly Persuasion. But Nixon Rush supported his children. They all had remarkable and successful and happy lives. And he, I think, was a great, great influence on Olive Rush. And her grandfather, Iredell, father of Nixon Rush, gave 6 acres adjacent to Rush Hill, their farm, which still exists today and is in the family, for a academy, an elementary school academy for all the kids in the Fairmont area. And so education and succeeding in life and a personal career, if one of his children wanted to pursue that, he was in favor of it, and it was really pretty rare. I always ask this question: does anybody know the most famous person to, you can't answer, to have been born in Fairmont, Indiana? Wow. James Dean. And you go to Fairmont, Indiana, and you find that there's not much about Olive Rush, but there is a great deal about James Dean, and why not? You know, the lipstick on the tombstones and that kind of thing, his tombstone. But I love James Dean too. So her education, I won't dwell on this much. Here is Olive identifying herself right here at the Corcoran Museum School. But first off, being from Fairmont, Indiana, she needed only to go a short distance of maybe 50 miles down to Earlham College, one of the better and still one of the best Quaker colleges in this country. And she matriculated there beginning in 1889. Some of the write-ups do point out that she left at age 16 to go to college. And she had a wonderful professor there, John Elwood Bundy, and he really persuaded her and mentored her in two important things. One, if you're going to be a serious artist, show your work prolifically, and she did that throughout her career all over the United States, even when she was here in Santa Fe. And he also, his favorite medium was watercolor. And Olive Rush adopted watercolor as her primary medium throughout her career. She did paint in oil some, but she, as an easel artist, was primarily a watercolorist. Bundy also said, if you're going to be a serious artist, I really don't think you should spend 4 years in a college education. You need to get yourself to a serious art school in the East. And very soon, because her sister and husband were living in Washington, D.C., Olive began to go to art school at the Corcoran Museum School of Art. And this was around 1890. As soon as she got there, she had another great professor, E.F. Andrews, and he recognized her talent immediately. It's always interesting to me that within months, she had won the bronze medal at the Second Society of Washington Artists, and the woman who had won the first prize was Catherine Critcher. And of course, she was a member of the Taos Society of Artists. Absent the day they took that photograph, though. You don't hear, she's sort of an asterisk to that group. But she was also at the Corcoran Museum. I always like to say that, you know, we don't have the Corcoran Museum anymore in Washington, D.C. It's that sad tale of the Corcoran Museum and its school, more or less taking on a whole new look after they virtually went bankrupt a couple of years ago. The school went to nearby George Washington University, but I always lament the demise of the Corcoran Museum in Washington, one of our outstanding and oldest American art museums. Finally, on the urging of Andrews, her professor, he said, if you're going to be really, really serious with an art career, get yourself to New York. So by 1900, she was, well, before that, 1894, she was in New York City studying where all the serious art students in this country were in school at the Art Students League. And she had great, great professors there, John Twachtman, Henry Siddons Mowbray, and Augustus St. Gaudens. But it was there, and we will move on in a minute, that she recognized her parents were paying for education. She felt very guilty about that, their first child to go to college. But she soon realized in New York that she could continue her schooling, but she could make a living, support herself through illustration. And of course, this was the magazine and the periodical illustration period, the great golden age of illustration. And she began working for Harper's Weekly, where everybody aspired to work, and various women's and sometimes not women's magazines of that period, all the ones that we know about. So she stayed there until around 1900 in New York, and she really wanted to get out of New York, and she decided to move to Philadelphia because Calvin was studying ophthalmology at med school in Philadelphia. In Philadelphia, she saw opportunity there. Philadelphia is full of publishing houses, not so many anymore, but at that point, she could take the train to New York, and so it was a nice fit for her, but she began to miss the camaraderie that she had experienced at her 3 other art schools. So serendipitously again, she found an answer about, 30 miles from Philadelphia at the Howard Pyle School in Wilmington, Delaware. And if you know anything about illustration, Howard Pyle was the great American illustrator of this period, and he pretty much taught all of the outstanding illustrators, from the women at Drexel, Violet Oakley, Elizabeth Shippen Green, and then the great male illustrators. Of course, you recognize N.C. Wyeth's name, Frank Schoonover, Alan Tupper True from Colorado. So this was the great thing, and she was accepted into his studio around 1904, and she stayed there until roughly 1911. But she met lifelong friends. Here's Olive Rush and an old Victorian, dusty boarding house in Wilmington, Delaware called Tusculum. Even its name sounds romantic. But that's where the women had their studios, and were sort of separate from the men at that point, and had just great space that she had not had in New York. She made great friends. And I love this photograph. This is Olive Rush on the left. This I dated around 1905. In the middle is a woman named Sarah Catherine Smith. She was from Wheaton, Illinois, and went on to teach at Gulf Park College for Girls down on the Gulf of Mexico. And on the right is a very significant person. This is Ethel Pennywell Brown. And Ethel married, eventually becoming Ethel Leach, and it is Ethel who was the recipient of these letters around which I built this book. They were lifelong friends. They became like sisters. There probably wasn't a month that went by during this era of their correspondence from 1904 to 1959 that they did not write. And Olive just paints a wonderfully vivid picture of all things going on here in Santa Fe in those letters. I own these letters. I'm looking for the appropriate repository, and these letters, really upon which is the foundation of this book, have not been seen or read by anybody else until this book has come out. Here's a poster that Olive Rush did for the Plastic Club, which was one of the first women's art clubs, or maybe the first. They say it's the first, that was in Philadelphia. So Olive's social life still sort of centered around Philadelphia. Some have said that Wilmington was a backwater at the time. I think that's probably what Pyle intended when he established himself in Wilmington. But a great sort of composition here. It shows the influence of Edward Penfield, her editor at Harper and Brothers, and just a great poster. One point I would really like to make is when Howard Pyle accepted these people, N.C. Wyeth, Alan Tupper True, all of the rest, and his women professionals, they were truly mature professional illustrators, and he was really just providing them with contacts in New York, criticisms when they needed it, and he said he performed no other role than just guidance in this school. This is a wonderful Christmas cover that Olive Rush did for Woman's Home Companion, perhaps the most popular of the women's magazines at this time. I think I've read that they had 750,000 readerships during this period, and Olive was lucky enough to have 3 of the Christmas covers, very coveted indeed. Then what did she do? Well, as all artists, she went to Europe. And this is a postcard from the American Art Students Club in Paris, and that's where all the women who went to Paris at the time, at least most of them, were boarding. And Olive went with a woman that she had met in New York, Alice Shilley. You may know her work around here. It's very prominent at Nidra Matucci and some of the others, galleries in town. And they had first in 1911 gone to Northern Europe, down to Cornwall, and back to Paris to study art. But from this particular postcard, it's 1913, and Olive and Alice Shilley and another woman named Clara Madeira met Ethel Brown in Paris, and Howard Pyle had died suddenly. And so not only were they in Paris, but really the colony, his colony, and the group of illustrators in Wilmington were leaving the scene. She did not go back to New York after Paris and France in 1913, but she had saved enough money from her illustration work to plan a trip with her father, who was now widowed, and they came out to the American Southwest in 1914. And this is an oil painting that Olive did at St. Xavier del Bac. I know many of you probably know it, south of Tucson, called the Cathedral in the Desert. And they took the train out, they spent about 2 months in Tucson, they moved up to Phoenix, and then they met her sister Myra, the one who was living in Washington, who had gone back to Fairmont, Indiana. Her husband by then owned the local newspaper. And it was just a wonderful experience. This is a portrait of an Indian family. Some dealers have tried to say that it was Maria and Julian. Well, it isn't, because Tony, their son, wasn't born until 1923, and this was 1914. I'm thinking that this is a portrait of an Indian family at Laguna. They stopped in Laguna for almost a week after they had left the Grand Canyon. A thing or two about the Grand Canyon. Of course, Fred Harvey, Mary Jane Elizabeth Coulter. Olive saw Bright Angel Lodge. In fact, they had a campground adjacent. It was called the Bright Angel Campground. She saw El Trovar. She saw the work of Mary Jane Elizabeth Coulter. And these letters that both her sister Myra and Olive Rush wrote about the experiences at the Grand Canyon in 1914 are absolutely marvelous. Think of it, 1914, it wasn't even a park. It wasn't even a national park. And we didn't have, as is in the newspaper today, the National Park Service. So it was an extremely early time to be at the Grand Canyon. And then what happened was, and I know the exact date, it's always thrilling for a historian to know the exact date, from these letters, that they landed in Santa Fe, New Mexico, this group of 3, on May 5th, 1914. They checked, sorry Jenny, they checked into the Vargas Hotel. And by then, it was, at that time, it was wrapped in these Victorian porches. And they fell in love with Santa Fe. Myra wrote that all the lawns were green and the shady green, towering trees were fed by the waters from the mountains. And they immediately became ingratiated in the community in Santa Fe. J.S. Candelario of the old Curiosity Shop just down the street met Olive and gave her all the models and all the props she wanted. She didn't even have to go out of town to paint the life in Santa Fe. But the most important thing that happened is another man that I feel has been very, very understudied here is Paul Walter. And he really paralleled Edgar Hewitt. He was a businessman. He owned the bank. He was head of the Historical Society of New Mexico. He started El Palacio magazine in 1913. And most important to me, in 1914, while she was here, he gave Olive Rush a solo exhibition of the work she had done in the West at the Palace of the Governors. Well, not only was he a great benefactor, but he wrote a great critique of this show in the Albuquerque Journal. And I think he nailed it very, very solidly. He said that Cowles and some of the Taos painters were painting the rugged side of Indian life, but that Olive Rush gave it that gentler sort of home life that we know of her work today. Paul Walter needs to be studied more. As she left Santa Fe, she had stayed 3 weeks. She could not get it out of her mind. She wrote Ethel Brown that it was the quaintest place she had ever seen. And we all probably feel the same way she did. But she had applied for free land in the Jemez settlement way over there through the Homestead Act of 1906. And thank goodness her application was denied, because I can't imagine her taking on a ranch in a remote area. She was disappointed in that. She went back to New York, worked a few more years in illustration, and this is a figure that she created for Woman's Home Companion called the Cherub. It's sort of like a fairy tale, and not only did she write these children's articles for Woman's Home Companion, but she also provided the text and the illustration, which was somewhat rare. These were several editions between 1916 and 1917. Then she decided, okay, this was a restless period, unusually so for her, because she usually had such direction. She said, well, I've just got to give up illustration. And by the way, illustration was dead. Only N.C. Wyeth and some of those male illustrators succeeded in a longer career, because we had had photography introduced during World War I. An artist doing illustration was rare indeed. But she said, I'm going to try portraiture. And she had gone with Sarah Catherine Smith to Boston to study with the great portrait painters, the Boston School there, a little bit earlier, several years before. And so she moved to Indianapolis. And her brother, her next to youngest brother, I need to mention him, Charles Everett Rush, became a leading library scientist in this country, and he was head of the Indianapolis public libraries at the time. So she went to Indianapolis. She was close to her relatives, close to Rush Hill, and she painted this magnificent portrait of the Ball children of Ball State University. And I'm happy to say, by the way, they are the Ball jar people. I'm happy to say that this portrait, this fine portrait that really is larger than it looks here, has been conserved, cleaned and conserved as a result of this book. And I will be speaking in Muncie in the next few weeks. She did not like portraiture. She said herself, it's just not what I want to do. And if you've been a portrait painter, you're always in fear that the sitter or the sitter's parents or somebody is going to reject it. But she just did not find it artistic enough as an outlet. So she saved her money. And without anybody's help or anybody helping her make the decision, on July 4th, 1920, she arrived in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And she was going to try it out. She went to a boarding house. Hewitt gave her the typical studio at the Palace of the Governors. And then very quickly she moved up to the corner of Garcia and Canyon Road, and her renting mate in the space next door was none other than Gustav Baumann. They became great friends, lifelong friends. Jane Baumann, his wife, lifelong friends of Olive, just inextricably tied in so many ways. And I sat over, I'm from Virginia, but we spent a lot of time in Santa Fe. I sat over at the wonderful greeting card show 2 years ago at Christmas that I'm sure most of you saw. And Anne Baumann gave the History Museum tapes that her father had done, just vignettes and memories of Santa Fe. And he was talking about Olive Rush, and he said when he saw her, when she stepped out of the taxi, I don't think it was an Uber car at that point, that he knew she was Quaker, and that he didn't need to be told. And of course, he had spent so much time in Brown County, Indiana, so he knew that whole lifestyle and perhaps the way someone looked. But he also said, you know, my dog liked her. I love Baumann. My dog liked her, so I decided I would like her. And he also said that while he was busy carving his wood blocks and throwing chips over his shoulder, very quickly Olive was setting up paint cans and brushes to begin experimenting in true fresco painting. This is 1950. This is probably the best, somewhat earlier photograph I have of 630 Canyon Road that she very quickly bought at the end of that summer. It was remarkable. I say we really don't know how old it was. Someone in the audience the other day where I was talking said it was about 150 years old when she bought it. It was a Mexican farm. What is unique about it, and you can still see portions of it, it is the old straw adobe construction. Immediately, she had to do some renovations on the house, but immediately, again, this book dealer yesterday became a part of the Santa Fe art colony. Her soon best friends was, of course, Gustav Baumann and the Cassidys, Ina and Gerald, his wonderful poster out in the lobby, and Witter Benner. And they began traveling all over Hopi Land and Arizona, thought nothing of going out overnight to these wonderful locations. And this is a drawing, a sketch, of course, she did for the house blessing dance at Zuni. And of course, we all know that the artist could not photograph or sketch, and this was from memory, and this is in the Archives of American Art. But the full-blown oil painting is in the Shelton Museum at the University of Nebraska. And Olive did teach art education at the University of Nebraska in 1922. This is one of my favorites. This is titled Girl on a Turquoise Horse. It's a montage of her memory paintings just after she had traveled to Hopi Land. And it was bought, remarkably, by Lou Hoover, President Herbert Hoover's wife. Lou Hoover, if you've never read about her, is an incredibly interesting First Lady. Despite her husband, she was progressive, and I would urge you to really read more about her. She was at Bishop's Lodge in 1921, and she came to Olive's studio in, I think, about that time, 22, and saw this painting. They communicated about it for over a couple of years, and Lou Hoover bought it in 1924. They became correspondents. They talked a lot about the legend of the turquoise horse, the Navajo legend, and became at least correspondence friends. It's been speculated that this painting hung in the White House, no evidence. That it may have hung in the presidential retreat. Herbert Hoover was the first to establish a Camp David weekend retreat type place in the Shenandoah Valley. It would have been appropriate there because it was furnished in southwestern decor. no evidence there, and then others have speculated that it hung at Stanford University, where they both retired and lived and built a house. No evidence, no evidence. But this painting, I'm proud to say, is being shown in the book and here today in color. It was never, in Olive's lifetime, was she able to reproduce it in any kind of printed media in color. It's now in a private collection. Chimayo. Of course, they all went to Chimayo, and I can't take the time today to read you her quotes. She wrote beautifully, she painted beautifully with words. So many of these artists did, but I will urge you to read in the book these beautiful letters. And she describes they're traveling, and another great friend who came out and camped in Olive's backyard, Laura von Peplendam. She was from Chicago, and she came out with her nephew. They drove out, and just the just word by word description of mounting the hill, and they're seeing the valley of Chimayo, and then they journey on to the Penitente country, and it's just really incredible how she describes that. So she had totally fallen in love with New Mexico by that time, around 1925. I show this because it is painful. I think I counted 5 and at least a half of the murals and her wall decorations that I'm talking about in this talk have been destroyed or they're lost, and this one has been. This is the design for Laia Sakia. She exhibited it at Architectural League in New York. I'm not sure when, maybe 1924. And it was painted on the dining room walls of a lovely, important couple that have also been lost to Santa Fe history, Sarah and David McComb. They had made their money in New York and California, and they built El Hogar, which was considered at the mid-20s an outpost location at the top of Canyon Road. It had a vineyard, it had residences for artists. The poet Roundup used to meet up there. It was just really a social place. And it is today the Compound Restaurant. I'm convinced that this mural is behind some of the paint there, and of course we all know that Alexander Gerard redid that property in the mid-1950s as the restaurant. But it's one of my favorite. So stylized, so modern. I won't spend the time to talk about this in a great way, but from 1925 to virtually 1930, Olive spent her time in Chicago, and she was basically doing interior decoration work for the McCormick family. And she worked at their houses out in Lake Forest and down on Michigan Avenue, and this is a sketch from the Archives of American Art for a screen that she was doing for Lucy Lynn, who was one of the descendants of the Chicago McCormick family. Then, and I can't talk about patronage much today. I love the aspect of patronage and Olive Rush, but Mary Cabot Wright had moved here, and she, of course, had bought, I think, Los Laceras out in Alcalde, let's say 1923. And she asked Olive immediately to paint true fresco murals out there. They're still there. They're in great shape. But Mary Cabot Wright invited her to go to Mallorca, a home that she owned in Spain in 1930. And this is one of Olive's watercolors from that trip to Spain. So we get to our room. And this was seminal. In 1929, Mary, Jane, Elizabeth Coulter, and Meme, every time Meme had a building, he asked his friend, he, by the way, was almost as close to Olive as Gustav Baumann, came the same year, he for his health, Olive not so. But he asked her to be a decorator of some sort or an artist in his buildings. And this is, of course, the famous New Mexico room. We're in it, we're sitting in it, and it was during the renovation. And Mary Coulter has a great line here that Barbara Felix supplied me a couple of years ago. And she wrote to Meme, and she said she was seeking the informal Mexican decor. And I quote, "I really don't think it is necessary to specify anything in particular, because I think Miss Rush has just the sense of humor that we wish to have." So Olive came in and she painted all of these wonderful murals on the walls. And I think it has been determined, certainly through research, Barbara and Jenny, that not only are the paintings gone, but the walls were removed. There may be, we would like to think at least, two. She also painted windows. Right behind where the books are, there may be 2 windows that come as close to Olive Rush's decorations. You'll have to walk around in a few minutes to her work here. And then people always ask, the street murals on San Francisco coming into the hotel and on Water Street, I really think not. And if they were Olive Rush's, they've been so retouched over time, well before the modern period, that I see some things, but I just can't say that they're Olive Rush's. This was a great thing for this for Olive Rush in her career. She was able to stay home. The town turned out. The hotel gave her a party. The La Fonda Orchestra played. The governor came. The mayor came. All of her friends came, and she felt very rewarded. And it was going to have a terrific impact on what she did in the next several years. This is, just want to talk a little bit about Mary Cabot Wright. She did this magnificent painting as a possible commission for an interior design shop in New York in 1931, Arden Gallery, and this painting is huge. Eugenia Chenard did the furniture for that show. I had no idea that Eugenia Chenard carved furniture, the most beautiful carved furniture I've ever seen. Far, in my humble opinion, outweighing Henderson's, and Joseph Bacos did some work, and Mary Cabot Wright was very upset about the Native American women using artificial dyes, and she actually designed the Indian rugs in the show and had the native weavers go back to the organic natural dyes. And it's a wonderful photograph found in the Archives of American Art showing Olive's mural for commission, the Wright rugs, and Eugenie Chenard's furniture. I am happy to say one of the rewards, many of course, but one of the rewards is I have found these murals that are in private hands, these paintings in private hands, and the furniture. And this, the actual objects did not let me down. They are remarkable, but they are in private hands. Okay, Olive Rush, murals in this room, 1929. Chester Ferris, who was the superintendent of the Santa Fe Indian School, saw these murals and invited Olive down to paint murals in the dining room of the Indian School. And Olive, being her generous, outward, gentle, and community-oriented self, said, "No, I will not do that, but I will teach the talented Indian students at your school how to paint their own murals." And of course, Dorothy Dunn was teaching at her studio school, but Olive went down as a volunteer and worked with the most talented Indian artists and taught them how to paint murals. In this photograph in 1933 are in the center Commissioner of Indian Affairs, Bureau of Indian Affairs, Charles Rhodes, and his wife. And at the opening of these murals that the youth had painted, everyone was just simply astounded. I'm not going to say that Olive Rush was the first to promote Native American art. She was working closely with Mary Austin, Elizabeth and John DeHuff, Oliver Lafarge, and John and Dolly Sloan. But these were the result of her work. And on the night of the opening, when this photograph was taken, I mean, everybody was just truly, truly taken with the success. And we had come so far, just a short, 8 years from the Burnson bill that was trying to make Indian culture assimilated into a Eurocentric culture. Even Rhodes said, Commissioner Rhodes, that this was an indication of success, of non-assimilation. And he gave permission to Charles Ferris and Olive Rush to take these murals to a national stage. And Olive soon realized that, how are we going to take wall paintings to a national stage? So she taught the kids to paint on canvas that could be rolled up and shipped. And these paintings went to the Corcoran in Washington with the help of Lou Hoover. And they went on to New York, to Rockefeller Center, and to the College Art Association, Tribal Arts Organization with John and Dolly Sloan. Olive spoke at Teachers College at Columbia University on these murals. Charles Everett Rush, her brother, was then the librarian there. And then finally, and with much bureaucratic turmoil, these paintings were taken and shown at the Century of Progress show in Chicago in 1933. She worked, Olive did, directly with the famous anthropologist, Dr. Fay Cooper Cole, and others, Harold Ickes, and so on and so forth, to get these shown. Remarkably, there's not much record of them. This is where they hung at the reproduction of a Mayan Nunnery at the fair in '33, and it wouldn't surprise you a bit to know that they were shown in the social sciences section of the fair rather than the fine arts section. There is a sad postscript to this. These paintings were lost. One of the Marshall Field women took these paintings after the fair closed to Marshall Field to exhibit and perhaps sell them, and they were never recovered, and nobody knows what happened to them. Nobody would ever take any responsibility for their loss, and it's not surprising either that these Indians by this time were becoming very, very well-known Native American painters, and they wanted their early work. And Olive, she really searched and wrote letters and did everything for about 8 years, but they were never recovered. In the midst of doing this, she was doing her own work. Can't talk much about this, but this is Florence Belle Bartlett's home out in Alcalde called El Mirador, and Olive painted murals on this patio, this barbecue patio, and unfortunately she lived to see and know that these beautiful, beautiful fresco murals were destroyed. If you know that story, Florence Belle Bartlett gave New Mexico and the world the International Folk Art Museum. I was amazed one day last week for somebody to say, "Oh, really? I thought that Alexander Gerard had started that museum." She and Florence Belle Bartlett were great friends, and even though we've lost this one, and by the way, state traded lands, they got El Mirador, and she got the spot on Museum Hill for her museum. But we have this wonderful watercolor that Duncan Phillips bought directly from Olive in 1929, which is basically the same subject matter that today is in the Phillips collection in Washington, D.C. So, She had done the work with the Indian children, and that was in the early years of the Depression. And we all know what happened. 1932, FDR became president, and I won't go through the laborious changes and names and everything of the New Deal projects and how they changed over time and what organization or what agency in Washington controlled it. But Olive became a very prolific WPA artist, and this is a treasure for your town and the state of New Mexico. These are the first murals she did under the WPA program at the Santa Fe Public Library. How many have seen them? Well, the rest of you haven't seen them because they're awfully hard to get to. When they built the new History Museum, everything was closed, and you have to walk all the way through the doors. Tell me which street that is. Is it Lincoln or Washington? The main entrance, Washington, and walk all the way up to the back, and then access these murals through the Chavez Library, and then they will unlock the doors, and you can see what, if you could see and were open, the original meme green arch doorway, and these murals are right inside. And shout out to Kathy Flynn and the National New Deal Preservation Association, which is having a benefit tonight. They restored these murals a couple of years ago. They were in great shape, and they rest there and are little known by the public. I was speaking to somebody yesterday, 2 days ago. Couldn't we please have them open once a month? But it is the financial cuts are so severe that there's not even a guard at that side of the History Museum anymore. So occasionally they are open, but I would encourage you to go take a look at them because they're just marvelous. 4 sides, and the theme of these murals is the library reaches the public, the people, and a lot of humor in them and just wonderful. 1934. These are absolutely my favorite. These are murals, true fresco, like the library ones, done at Las Cruces, New Mexico State University today. These were, of course, for the, the Mechanical Arts and Agricultural School in 1936. She went down, she researched the economy and the history of the area as they were instructed to do from Washington for the WPA work. And this, of course, is the chili melt that is so deadly to one of the major crops down there. The cotton industry. And while I don't have a photograph, there is one of her in the book on scaffolding. She also painted the ceiling. It's just magnificent, and it's all in the entrance of the biology building. And to imagine that she was doing this in her 60s on scaffolding, and she had 2 assistants. Tom Lee, who became a rather famous Texas painter, was her young assistant, as was a student at Las Cruces. If you're anywhere near that area, you need to see these murals. And again, Kathy Flynn's organization restored them several years ago. We mostly know our WPA history through post office murals. She painted this in 1938 in Osage County in Pawhuska, Oklahoma. Anybody see the movie Osage County with Meryl Streep? This is, yeah, whoa. This is where this post office mural is located. It's in great shape. Anything that she painted that was going to be durable as a business or a federal arm have remained intact. And this depicts the Osage Indian Treaty with a white man, very peaceful Indian treaty in that area. Then she traveled to Florence, Colorado, which is west of Pueblo. And she got smarter. She was getting older. She painted these murals on canvas. They were rolled up and taken out and attached to the wall. But this depicts the wildlife of the plains and really are most beautiful. So that was the end of her federal supported mural work. But she did one more, and she did this in 1939, and it was sort of a summary of what she had spent the last decade on. This is the Mizell Trading Post on Central Avenue in Albuquerque. And John Mizell moved his trading posts from after the demise of the Fred Harvey Hotel there. He moved it over to Central Avenue. John Galmeen built a new building, asked Olive Rush, his friend, to do the decorations. 9 years later, after she had fostered the careers of these Native American artists, she was not going to take credit and do the whole work, and she invited them back, many of them, as professional artists, to be paid and to paint these murals. And I say to you, who's seen them? New Mexico, be vigilant. You cannot let these murals be destroyed. I worry about them. I worry about them. They are in the entrance. They are well preserved. And this is Pop Chile, is that the way you say her name? And some of the artists looking up. Pablito Velarde, our dearly departed Indian woman artist, wrote of Olive Rush later. She said, and it was in the newspaper in Albuquerque in 1929. I mean, this was Harrison Begay, this was Pop Chile, this was Pablito Velarde, so many. Somebody was talking about Harrison Begay, I overheard. Pablito Velarde said, Olive Rush was so patient with us, and she had this inner spirit, and really said that she mentored her in a powerful way. So Olive started with the Indian youth and really capped this whole decade of her life, seeing that these Indians had become extremely important and successful artists. And I don't think that she's ever been given that much credit. Very quickly through World War II, we don't have to talk about what was happening here during World War II. I mean, they had all survived the Depression. Olive did so, by the way, very well financially. Not that she was rich, but she had this government support. But she really turned inwardly during World War II and started her social reform causes in a more intense way. And this, we can only say, is a statement of mourning, anti-war painting that she painted, I say around 1945. Some have speculated that this painting is the collapse of the Nambe Church. I don't think so, because you see up here almost what looks like a World War I soldier, and you see the stretcher. It's nice to contemplate what she really was stating here, but I believe that it's certainly anti-war. This is one of my favorite photographs. I have two near the end. This is Dr. Olive Rush. Dr. Olive Rush received an honorary doctorate degree from Earlham College in 1947. And she went back and she gave speeches and talks. She gave a great nod to her original teacher, John Elwood Bundy. I'm talking, by the way, in a couple of weeks at Earlham. And she was asked to evaluate their curriculum, art curriculum, and she gave this painting. And I'm happy to say that it answers a question that I often get, perhaps the first question. Did she know Georgia O'Keeffe? And yes, she did. And we can talk about that if you have further questions. But in this painting of Olive's sister Emma, who spent much of her life on Canyon Road in her late life, behind Emma, peeking around, is a cat named Anselmo. It was Olive Rush, it was Georgia O'Keeffe's cat. When Georgia O'Keeffe would go back to New York and spend the winters with Stieglitz, the cat would come into Canyon Road and spend the winters with Olive. And they were both very fond of this cat, and he became rather famous. Unfortunately, I wasn't the first to publish this, and Barbara Lyons' great book of the Maria Chabot and Georgia O'Keeffe letters. Barbara got to this point first, but Maria Chabot was sort of the Sherpa, no better way to say it, of O'Keeffe, and she would bring the cat back and forth from Abiquiu to Canyon Road. My point being made, and we haven't been able to dwell much on her easel art, she surely did become a modernist late in her life. This is one of my favorites, called The Shower in the Jemez, and it's 1954. It went back to Delaware, and it's just really one of my favorites. We could talk a little bit about her evolution into modernism, if you wish. And then my final favorite photograph, 1956, a new critic had come to Santa Fe named W. Tedford Levinas. He was from Kansas City, and he did a great profile on her in Desert Magazine. And I think here you see the evolution of her art. The bottom one is called Mexican Gardener, and if it looks familiar to you, it is owned by the Santa Fe National Bank on the plaza. I urge you to go in and take a look at it. And then the one on top, even though it's her deer paintings, mostly from the 40s, you see that there is an evolution into a more modernistic approach. And finally, her self-portrait, which she did in 1951, a line drawing. Two people have said to me when they opened the book, "I thought that was you." I'm very flattered. She had a great friend named Grace Dunham Guest. And Grace Dunham Guest, again, just a woman that has fallen off the page, was perhaps the first woman museologist in this country. And she had helped Charles Freer set up his Asian museum on the Mall. And she settled here and became a great friend of Olive's, she and her sister Bessie. And this profile of Olive Rush really summed up her life in 1951. And Olive did this self-portrait for that publication, which is now gone. I think it disappeared, New Mexico Quarterly in the 50s. But she often used it as a garden invitation, and invitation to one of Olive's garden parties were much coveted. I think Bauman and some of the other guys have made those parties famous with his stories about spiking her punch. And they would run down to Connie's and get the liquor and come back, and when Olive turned her back, they would pour it in, and then she thought that it tasted much better, several years. But no, she's been forgotten, and I think that she does really deserve a stage that she hasn't had before. So thank you for coming. And please, questions. Now, I've been told that I'm going to get lots of questions from you guys.
Several years ago, I did a tour at Los Luceros, which is up in the Alcalde area, Mary Cabot Wheelwright's home. Mm-hmm. And they told us that some of the wall art on the second floor around the Kiva fireplace was Olive Rush's.
Absolutely.
Okay. You've seen that then?
Yes,
yeah.
And
okay.
They're in good shape. And of course, she painted those in 1927. I think Mary Cabot Wheelwright bought that in 1923. And yes, she did that one. And she did a smaller wall decoration in a back bedroom on there. Funny story that she wrote, Ethel Leach, that she was sitting in that bedroom one day working up there, and she happened to look, and this man was in this tree looking right at her, and it was Elliot Porter photographing birds. So, in these letters you get all of these juxtaposition and layers of famous people, but a wonderful letter that Olive wrote to a renter. She often rented her house here when she was away, even when she was up at Alcalde. And a wonderful description of a dawn deer dance at San Juan. These letters that I've told you about before, I mean, describing the Indian dances are just marvelous. And they got up at dawn, and this was like 1927, and they were there to see the painting of the dancers and the young boy, and then they went home for lunch and rested, and they went back in the afternoon. So, Mary Cabot Wheelwright. Just heard yesterday, was anybody else besides us in front at Leslie Poling Kempe's lecture yesterday? You know, Mary Cabot Wheelwright is one of the 4 people she treats in that wonderful book, Ladies of the Canyon. But Mary Cabot Wheelwright is a most interesting person, as is Florence Belle Bartlett, who has not been really as well known. Bartlett hasn't as Mary Cabot Wheelwright, and I'm always amazed that Florence Bartlett's sister was May Bartlett Hurd, the Hurd Museum in Phoenix. And why isn't somebody doing a book on the philanthropy of those 2 sisters? And her brother, Frederick, was a major contributor of post-impressionist art to the Art Institute of Chicago. When you get into this stuff, as Leslie said yesterday, I mean, it's just layers and layers and layers and layers of wonderful stories. There's somebody who stood up 3 times.
Hello. 2 very quick questions. We have a painting in the portal here by Agnes Sims, and we have been told that she lived at the compound restaurant. So would she have rented it from Olive, or would she?
As far as I know, Agnes Cross Sims never lived at the compound restaurant. Now, she may have.
Says
I
it on
don't
the
know.
little ticket. Yeah, it says it on the little
But
notice.
don't forget that the McCombs, this wonderful couple, and by the way, I have just finally, after 10 years, found one of their descendants who has a treasure trove of information. They built, if you drive into the compound, that which is now a nice residential area on the right with a gatehouse, those were built as artist studios and residences by the McCombs, and it is entirely possible. But let me tell you where Agnes Sims lived most of her life. I don't know how to tell you. It's across from Ernesto Mayan's gallery, and you go to the right as you're headed up Canyon Road, and there is a complex enclave of buildings back there. Medicine Man Gallery was back there for a while. Agnes Sims bought that property. She was wealthy. She was from the Philadelphia area, and she developed all of that property back there.
Okay. And very quickly, we hear a story that Olive did the windows in the South Portal before it was covered in. Do you know anything about that?
I do,
portal?
and I hope it's true. I have never found evidence, but it is very clear that her legacy, with particularly the window paintings and everything, they echo many of her motifs. As I said, the one back there where the books are, Jenny and Barbara Felix and I believe that comes closest. We think it's been redone, but it was probably just copied over from what she may have painted. It has been speculated she painted some of the furniture. I will never say if I don't have concrete evidence, and I don't. Can I just say one other thing? This is fun. El Nido, that's reopening as a restaurant in Tasuki. She painted there in '56. I mean, she was 70s. And she never drove. She owned an automobile like my Aunt Lucy, so that if somebody came that could drive her around, you know, she would be the first one in the car. But the architect of El Nido picked her up in the morning. She went out to paint, and you know, it's opening again as a restaurant. And I have noticed that Olive painted a cockfight and a Mexican scene on the walls out there. You know, Will Schuster's were taken from there and moved to the museum, Fine Arts Museum. Olives were on the wall and probably lost. But the logo is already in, what is it, Edibles magazine, is chickens. So, you know, I want to believe that Olive's legacy out there lives on. And By the way, the guy let me in to look at the thing. They're retaining a lot of the old bar and dance hall thing at El Nido, and I think it's supposed to open in November.
I just wanted to say, in case people don't know, that the Wright Museum has just published a brand new biography of Mary Wright. It's a big, thick book, and it's
Lee Armstrong,
Lee
right?
Armstrong, who was a long-term employee of the Wright, wrote it, has been writing on it for 20 years.
I feel her pain.
Yes. And so it's available in the Wright, in the Case Trading Post. That's the only place it's available, but it's
Isn't there going to be an event?
Friday the 29th.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Good for her.
yeah.
And I find that so much of this is happening now. I used to come to Santa Fe for, since the early 80s, and we're knowing so much more. Leslie's work, Lee's work, my work, and they all mesh beautifully. And what it's doing is really giving us a sense of the broader dimension of what this place meant and the contributions of women. And I've spent my career doing that, so I'm very happy about it. Okay.
Any other questions? Dr. Gilmore, we sincerely thank you for being here and making this wonderful presentation.
Loved it.
Thank you.